It was one of the very first times in my life that I experienced a real miracle of provision. Of course, since that time, this happened about 20 years ago. Since that time, I've had to trust the Lord on occasions for literally millions of dollars. And trust me, there have been some nail-biting sessions and some very serious moments in prayer over the last 20 years. But it was some of those experiences in the very beginning that taught me these lessons that have allowed me to step by step walk in the fulfillment of the promises of God. And this happened to me when I was in Bible college. I was in the same school that Eric and Scott, who you're about to hear from, we all went to the same Bible school together. And I was literally living by faith. When I say I was living by faith, I don't mean that I was just trusting God in addition to my streams of income. I had nothing except what was being provided for me by the Lord. And there were some moments where it was very difficult and very touch and go. And I remember I was coming to the end of my very first semester there at Bible college, and there was a deadline where we had to pay a deposit for the next year's tuition. And the deposit that had to be paid on this particular day was $2,000. I had to have $2,000. And I went and I looked at my bank account, and when I looked, all that I had in my bank account was $300. Now, $2,000 might not sound like a lot of money to most of you, but it's a lot of money when you've only got $300. And so, I'm sorry, I had $200 in my bank account. I needed to have $2,000. And so, I was in my room and I'm praying, and like many of you do when you have a need. And I was saying, Lord, you see the need. I have $200. I need $2,000. Lord, do something, do a miracle for me today. And the Lord spoke to me very clearly, and this is what he said to me, and this is a word for somebody listening to me right now. This is what he said. If what you have in your hand will not meet your need, it can't be your harvest, it must be your seed. Let me say that to you one more time. He said, if what you have in your hand will not meet your need, it can't be your harvest, it must be your seed. How many of you know the scripture says that he gives seed to the sower? So maybe you're looking at what's in your hand and you're saying, God, this is not enough. God's saying, look, I never intended for you to eat that. I meant for you to plant that. This is seed for the sower. God provides that seed. And when you plant the seed, then you get the harvest. When you eat the seed, then you end up with a famine. And so I'm sitting there in my room and I said, Lord, okay. And it suddenly occurs to me, I need 2,000, I have 200. So the Lord has literally given me the tithe of what I need. Does anybody see the significance of this? So I said, Lord, I understand what you're saying, but now just tell me, how can I give this? Where can I sow this? And suddenly, I kid you not, with God as my witness, within seconds, I had a knock at the door. I open up the door, and there's one of my friends from college. His name is Josh. These guys would know him. And he was crying. Now, this guy was a wrestler. He was a big guy. He was a muscular guy. He was a guy that was always goofing and laughing. I'd never seen him cry before, but for the first time, there were tears running down his face. And it took me off guard. I said, come in. And I said, Josh, what's wrong? And he began to share with me. He said, I'm not going to be able to come back to school next year. And I said, why not? He said, well, I had to put down the deposit on my dorm room today. And he said, I don't have the money. And so he said, I simply can't come back. And so I'm just going around saying goodbye to all my friends. And I said, well, Josh, how much do you need? He said, well, I was supposed to put down $300, but I only have 100. And I said to him, Josh, I said, I've got good news for you. I've got the other $200. I wrote him a check right there. I prayed for him. He walked out of there with a big smile on his face. I got back down on my knees, and this is what I said, tongue in cheek. I said, Lord, well, now I've made lots of room in my bank account. Lots of room. And I said it somewhat sarcastically, but and this is the amazing thing. I had given away everything that I had, and I felt joy in my heart. I don't know how to explain that, but I was so happy that I'd been able to obey and to give. Can I tell you something? When you obey Jesus, you might be gritting your teeth as you hear this, because some of you, he's already spoken to you and told you what to do. But listen, when you obey, there will be such a joy that comes in to your heart. There's such joy in obeying him. And so I finished praying, and It was later on that day, and I decided to go down to the public library to check my email. Remember, this is 20 years ago. Email was like on our phones back then, remember? So I had to go to the public library, and I had this Juno account. I don't know if anybody here remembers Juno, and it was this dial-up thing. And so I got onto my email, and there was an email from my dad, which was unusual. I mean, emails were not as common back then. And so I look forward to reading it, and he said that a family friend that we had known from years and years and years earlier when I was a boy, who happened to be a doctor, this guy had gotten in touch with my dad and said he just felt led to help support my college education. And so he said he was sending a gift to support me. And my dad said, I've already deposited the money in your account. It is a check for $2,000. The same day. The same day. And I learned this amazing lesson. I learned that you just simply cannot outgive God. And what amazed me about it is that for that miracle to happen, do you realize that the miracle had already been set in motion before the test came my way? See, somehow God had already looked into the future and saw that obedience and said, I'm going to bless you. And this is what I believe for some of you, that your blessing is already on the way. If you had any idea what God has set in motion to provide for the needs that you have, you would be blown away. But